started for me in kindergarten. My father had been a wrestler. And my father went to state in wrestling. So it was only natural that he believed that his sons were going to grow up to be wrestlers. So it started. I was in kindergarten and my brother was 4 years old and we started wrestling. I wrestled through 6th grade. And to make a true confession here in this place, I hated it. It was always a struggle on so many levels. First off, to go to the mat and to be one-on-one against an opponent, I have a hard time oftentimes, as some of you may know, with that win-lose concept, and one being the victor and one ending up pinned to the mat. Additionally, as you go to that mat on your own, you are laid bare, completely vulnerable, showing forth your own might and strength as well as your deepest longings and deepest intimacy, and it's uncomfortable. Especially when you have people watching and cheering. Not an easy place to be as a young child, at least for me. And yet, as I come to the story that we hear in Genesis today about Jacob, there is something that is so vital and so pivotal in this story. And what it means to wrestle, to be vulnerable and intimate, to be laid completely bare. You see, as we come to the story, we oftentimes forget the background of Jacob, this favored son of the mother who has stolen birthright and blessing, who has gone before his brother who rightly deserved these things. And then, when things were getting hot and heated, sneaked away, off to see his uncle and relatives in a distant land for his own protection. This one who fell in love and then was thwarted in his attempt at love by this uncle, this cousin, who's always lurking behind the scenes. And then, as he is getting ready to marry a second time, he finally gets to marry the one he loves, and then builds up this family. Now, when we talk about family values, this becomes an interesting story, of course, because he's married twice and then has 2 other women that he's intimate with, and now has all of these children, at least 12 sons and numerous daughters. But he's realizing that he's got this huge, huge family, and all of these herds, and all of the livestock, and it's time for him to leave. He needs to part ways with the uncle. He needs to go home. In his heart of heart, I believe that he's saying, it's time for reconciliation. It's time for healing. It's time for wholeness. So Jacob goes. He goes with this family and the livestock, the herds, the flocks, and he's preparing himself to meet his brother whom he has wronged. And wronged horribly. And as part of this, he steps back. And he crosses over the Jabbok River, sending the others on ahead. Perhaps it was a time of meditation, a time of silence, a time of prayer. But we know that what happens in the midst of this is that there is this incredible wrestling match, a brawl out there in the wilderness, in which Jacob struggles And my guess is he struggles with who he has been and the ways that he has wronged his brother. He struggles with the love in his life, and he struggles with what it means to be a father, and he struggles with all that it means to be a person looking at their own mortality. And he crosses over, taking nothing, leaving himself there. And there in that place, he wrestles with a man that we come to hear or associate with God. They wrestle throughout the night. Imagine the vulnerability. Now, I'm always a little puzzled, and I'll also share this, that if this is God, the Most High, the All-Powerful, the Almighty, you'd think that Jacob would have been pinned down to the ground in just a second. But rather, over the course of the night, what does it mean to step into that place and struggle with faith and struggle with God, move after move, memory after memory, vision after vision? It's not just that one night. This is life. There in the mix, there, deeply being challenged and lifted up. And they wrestle. Now, just when we think that Jacob is going to have the last word, there's a little sidearm punch that seems to take place, and his hip is put out of socket. Not a very fair move in wrestling, right? At least in the old way of wrestling. Now you've got the mixed martial arts, and that changes everything. But here in this time, and the hip is put out of joint. But the wrestling continues. And there's this question posed saying, what is your name? Your name. Another point of vulnerability and of intimacy. And he says, Jacob. You're no longer going to be called Jacob. You are going to be called Israel, the one who wrestles or strives with God. Now, another fascinating piece is, in return, Jacob says, what is your name? Never gets an answer. Never gets the answer. Now, there are, I believe, at least two, if not more, reasons for this. First and foremost, this section of Scripture in Genesis is tied to what is called the Yahwist tradition. The Yahwist tradition in the writing and the formation of Scripture is one that is about deep intimacy and connection with God. This is the God that walks in the Garden of Eden with the people. This is the God who handholds and is in conversation with the people. But this is also the God where the name is not spoken. It is the name beyond all names, the sacred. And you hold that close. So we get the intimacy, but we do not get the name in the story. Similarly, as we hear this story, there is that deep sense of mystery, of allowing it to linger. What does it mean to strive with God and not always get the answer? We strive with God day in and day out, most of us, lifting up our prayers. Sometimes we don't always get the answer, or at least the answer we expect or anticipate. Sometimes there's that moment of silence, the pause, that invites us into the next step in the journey, the next part of the relationship. So as we come to the story, we think of the intimacy and we think of the rich tradition of not naming God's name, but we also allow ourselves to live into that mystery about what it means to be vulnerable and intimate, but not always hear or receive the answer. Rather, to be invited into that next step in the relationship.